After watching the video of the stages of disaster and learning the collective trauma definition and how it affects people in certain scenarios, I think it's important that we deal with collective trauma in certain ways that may be different from just specific trauma to regular life situations. So, when you think about the definitions of collective trauma, one of the things um, that stuck out to me in the definition was that it literally is described as a blow to the basic tissues of social life. So we're not talking about specifically where like something in your life has just been uprooted, like the loss of a spouse or something like that. Um, those things don't affect every area of your life, just certain areas like relationships or something else. But this is something that affects your life as a whole. It affects the way you live. It affects the way you work. It affects the way that you're aware culturally and socially. And these are the things where it also affects the way that you live with other people. And then begins to put some sort of binders and blinders on your person and on the way that you see reality. Sometimes it's almost as if you get into a panic mode where, or maybe even just a survival mode where you look at different situations of what has happened. Specifically in the video, they responded to Hurricane Katrina and how life literally looks hopeless. And so, as far as interpreting this for someone who just went through disaster, the collective trauma is unique to this type of disaster, um, like like losing a home, like a loved one that has been lost. Um, this is collective trauma is um, affects every area of your life. It is what kind of just takes your life and flips it upside down. Um, so when you go through a traumatic event, one of the things that I think is important to remind those who might be going through something like that is that you need people around you. You one of the things that one of the ways in which God has created us is for relationships. It says in Genesis that it's not good for man to be alone. God created Adam in the garden and then saw that he was alone and it was not good for him. That's not only good for marriage and marital relationships and relationships as far as like love is concerned or companionship, but it's also good. A good rule of thumb for those of us who live in the world. We need social interaction. We need community. We need an inner circle, if you will. Um, we need people around us that when things do go south, when things do come down to kind of brass tacks, we have people around us to support us and to build us up. Um, it's almost as though that is good for our own well-being. That this social interaction, this aspect of community, is good for our mental wellness. Um, and so, collective trauma, because it affects every single aspect of your life, makes the recovery process that much more vital, but also that much more extensive. One of the things that the video said that I thought was very, very impactful was that you don't just lose what you have, but you lose the memories that you've made over your lifetime. You lose where you went to school. They said you lose the church you were baptized in or married in or whatever. You lose the home that you built, or you lose your family farm, or I mean, you could add to any of those things. So when it comes to the impact um, of going through a disaster like this and having having someone's mental well being maybe in question, sometimes I think, and I think this was posed in the video as well, that sometimes mental health can be kind of pushed to the back burner because of the imminent danger of the communities that are involved. Specifically with something like a hurricane, you don't just simply have a mental disaster. You have a physical disaster. There's a natural disaster where we're not just talking about thoughts and emotions and feelings, but we're talking about physical buildings. We're talking about lives being uprooted. We're talking about physical reality here as well, not just metaphysical. And so it is important to remember that mental health is a part of the recovery process, even in these issues of collective trauma. I found an article that says the result being that mental health services are limited in capacity or exclusionary. For example, it lists for political reasons, certain groups of persons may be denied assistance. So when you get into the aspect of mental health and mental well-being in a time of collective trauma, this article says that sometimes those services can be limited because they may be some sort of political service, or they may be a government service or what have you, where they're not offering it to everybody. But another way that people deal with this mental well-being is they tend to go backward. When life is uprooted, when life goes in a way that you don't expect, people deal with stress and this sort of disaster as with what one author calls action and backsliding. And that's the idea where people habituate back into this unhealthy lifestyle where PTSD is more regularly triggered. You hear a thunderstorm and you're automatically thinking back to this trauma of a hurricane, or you hear you can think of like veterans who might hear fireworks and they're automatically their mind automatically goes back to war and their wartime. So what does the recovery process look like then? Well, there's 6 specific stages here where that were mentioned in the video, and then how counseling is needed throughout this. One stage that was interesting to me was the first stage, which was the pre-disaster stage. Most people don't think about the possibility of a disaster. I can only imagine that most people don't move to the coast, the Gulf Coast or the east or western coast, thinking that there's going to be a hurricane, or thinking that, hey, I might lose this house I just built or just bought. For a lot of people who live there, there's no awareness of a natural disaster or collective trauma like this happening. The second stage is the disaster stage, which is for the survivors, not the responders. This can be a short-term stage because it doesn't have to be like a hurricane or a natural disaster, but it could be something much smaller on the scale, if you will. But the reality is, when you have something as big as something like Katrina, the stages do last longer because they're building upon another. You don't just have, again, a mental treatment and a mental issue, but it's physical, and there's rebuilding that goes on. The third stage is the heroic phase, where the support effort comes into view. The country, like Katrina, this comes all the way down from the top of the government all the way down to church groups and disaster relief groups and all of this. But the initial phase is rescue, but it ends up building into restoration. And one of the things I noticed most about this stage in the video was how much the video recognized the Christian community coming into the affected area and restoring and rebuilding what they could. The fourth phase is the honeymoon phase. This is where encouragement starts to build around the community, and everyone kind of gets that sense that, yeah, everything is actually probably going to be okay. Like we're moving forward. It's the sense that others really do rally around you. They do care about you, and it's almost as if there's sort of this confirmation that everything is going in the right direction and it's looking good. The fifth stage is the disillusionment phase, where what people are seeing now is like, oh, this is much larger than what we thought. And sometimes you can get some realities that set in where people are now starting to maybe pull out their resources, and things starting to kind of get back to reality. And then last is the reconstruction phase, which is the start of the new normal. And that's where people tend to rebuild their lives after this affected trauma.